Motherhood is supposed to be natural, instinctive. It's meant to come with a bond so strong, so unbreakable, that it forms the moment you first hold your child. But what if it doesn't? What if a mother looks at her baby and feels nothing? Or worse, what if she feels resentment? This is the story of We Need to Talk About Kevin, one of the most chilling explorations of any mother's darkest fears. Usually when people talk about this movie, they focus on Kevin, who they believe is the spawn of Satan. But when you read the original book, it becomes clear that this isn't really his story. This is a journey of a mother confronting the terrifying possibility that the darkness she fears in her son may have come from within her. At the beginning of We Need to Talk About Kevin, Eva is in her mid-50s. It's been 2 years since the mass murder Kevin committed at his school, killing 9 of his classmates plus his father and his sister. Eva's life took a dramatic turn. She is far from the independent, career-driven woman she once was in her 30s and early 40s, when it seemed like she had it all: a thriving travel guidebook business, world adventures, the financial freedom of an upper-middle-class lifestyle, and a spacious home in a nice neighborhood. All gone. She had to sell her company and the house she actually hated, taking a regular job at a generic travel agency. Now Eva is isolated. Her world has shrunk to a monotonous cycle. Work, home, visits to Kevin's detention center, repeat. A glass of wine or several is still a familiar comfort, now paired with a few tranquilizers before bed. What's important to understand is that the story is entirely shaped by Eva's perspective, told through the letters she writes years and decades later. She decides what to share, what to leave out, and how to frame it, so we never get a completely objective picture. As Lionel Shriver, the author, puts it, quote, "Eva is not reliable, though she is telling the truth as she understands it. She's trying to be honest, but that is not the same thing as telling the objective truth." End quote. The film adaptation, while incredible in its visuals and eerie atmosphere, doesn't fully capture this unreliable narration. If readers struggled with Eva's version of events, the film makes it even harder to remember that we're only seeing one side of the story.
Overall, I would have made it less confusing. I thought that the film made it harder to understand what was going on.
There's no simple answer to why things happened. That's what makes this story so compelling. Piecing things together, questioning, discovering. In this video, I'll be looking at different perspectives and challenging the oversimplified Kevin is a monster and Eva is a helpless mother narrative, which the movie, intentionally or not, makes easier to fall into. Eva's childhood and family history are revealed in fragments throughout her letters, so it makes sense that the movie doesn't fully explore it. Yet knowing her past is key to understanding why motherhood never felt natural to her. It was always an act she had to force. In the movie, the only glimpse into Eva's family comes through an awkward phone call with her mother, during which Eva pretends everything is fine and simply wishes her mom a Merry Christmas.
Bye, Mom.
That alone tells you their relationship is strained, and to some extent that was true for a long time. Eva never knew her father. He died in World War II before she was born. Eva is really proud of her Armenian heritage, especially since much of her extended family on both sides was killed in the Armenian genocide. This deeply shapes her identity and explains why she's always felt disconnected from American culture. She has a lot of criticism towards it and more drawn to European ways of living. Quote, "I identified with weirdos. I had strong, stormy Armenian features and so wasn't considered pretty. I had a funny name, and I was a dreamer who fantasized endlessly about escape, not only from Racine, but the entire United States." End quote. Eva's family was just her older brother, and her mother, who suffered from agoraphobia. This created a reverse dynamic where, as a child, Eva often had to take on adult responsibilities for her mother. Her mother couldn't drive her anywhere or attend her school functions, always hiding behind excuses. Eva admits in her letters that she always feared turning into her mother, which could be another reason why seeing the world became her whole career. Everything changed on the day of Kevin's horrific act, the day Eva refers to in her letters simply as Thursday. That day, she called her mother, and to her surprise, her shut-in mother offered to fly to her. After everything that happened, their relationship actually got better, and they even spent Christmas together. Quote, "For years, I wrote off my mother as having no grasp of my life, but after Thursday, I realized I'd made no effort to understand hers. Needing kindness, I'm kinder now, and we get on amazingly well." End quote. This is part of how Eva changes by the end, finally understanding what it means to just be there for someone, something she never truly did for Kevin. Quote, "That boy had something missing," she, Eva's mother, pronounced in the past tense, as if he were dead. "She was trying to make me feel better, though I worried that what Kevin was missing was a mother like mine." End quote. Eva met her husband Franklin at 33 years old through work. In her mind, she had always imagined ending up with someone entirely different. A foreigner, a quiet intellectual who lived off the land and rejected mainstream society. Quote, "Are you chuckling yet? Because then along came you. A big broad meat eater with brash blonde hair and ruddy skin that burns at the beach. And my Lord Franklin, a Republican." End quote. Eva and Franklin are polar opposites in almost every way. Eva is a cynical Democrat, critical of America, while Franklin is a proud traditional Republican. Their personalities and parenting styles clash too. Eva is introspective, intellectual, and distant, while Franklin is warm, easygoing, and overly optimistic. It's hard to see what drew Eva and Franklin together, since Eva's letters focus mostly on the negatives and are more about her and Kevin. And without Franklin's perspective, it's impossible to know the full story. It does make you wonder, if they hadn't had kids, would their marriage have lasted? Many people believe it was doomed from the beginning, but not Lionel Shriver.
No, I don't think they were doomed. I speak from experience. I think when you're two very different people, sometimes it can work wonderfully.
In her letters, Eva repeatedly expresses her love for Franklin and is devastated when he initiates their divorce, almost right before Kevin's massacre, though Franklin never lives to go through with it. Quote, "From a young age, there was only one thing I truly wanted, aside from escaping Racine, Wisconsin, a good man who loved me and would stay. Everything else was secondary. I could have lived without children. I couldn't live without you." End quote. In Eva's words, she was never naturally drawn to motherhood. She waited for the maternal instinct everyone talked about to hit her, but it never did. She was uneasy with the word family in general. In retrospect, she admits that her reasons for not wanting children were selfish and petty, but at their core, you can tell that they reflected a deep fear of losing her identity. Here's Eva's list of reasons. Number 1, hassle. Number 2, less time, just the two of us, or try no time, just the two of us. Number 3, other people, PTA meetings, ballet teachers, the kids' insufferable friends, and their insufferable parents. Number 4, turning into a cow. Number 5, unnatural altruism, being forced to make decisions in accordance with what was best for someone else. I'm a pig. Number 6, curtailment of my traveling. Number 7, dementing boredom. I found small children brutally dull. Number 8, worthless social life. Number 9, social demotion. Once I had a toddler in tow, every man I knew, every woman too, which is depressing, would take me less seriously. And number 10, paying the piper. Parenthood repays a debt, but who wants to pay a debt she can escape? Apparently, the childless get away with something sneaky. Besides, what good is repaying a debt to the wrong party? Only the most warped mother could feel rewarded for her trouble by the fact that at last her daughter's life is hideous too. Eva saw parenthood as a transactional process rather than an act of love. She dreaded the sacrifices, the chaos, the loss of independence, and most of all, the confrontation with her own worst qualities. Quote, "I wasn't only afraid of becoming my mother, but a mother. I dreaded confrontation with what could prove a closed, stony nature, my own selfishness and lack of generosity, the thick, tarry powers of my own resentment." End quote. Despite her reluctance, Eva still had reasons for having a child. She saw not having one as nihilistic, and in her own way, she wanted her child to admire her. But more than that, she was bored. After years of traveling and working, she was searching for something new. Quote, "At least if I got pregnant, something would happen. I like the idea of turning the page is all." End quote. Franklin still remained the biggest catalyst for having kids. He deeply believed in fatherhood. For him, having a child was the answer to life's purpose. Eva would later accuse him of placing that burden on Kevin, expecting him to fulfill that need. In the end, Eva was pulled off the fence because she knew Franklin wasn't truly happy without a child. He never explicitly pressured Eva to have children, but she saw how much he longed for one and how he lit up around other people's kids. Eva's pregnancy experience mirrored her conflicted decision to have a child. At first, she stopped using contraception without telling Franklin, leaving it to fate and almost removing her own responsibility. But when pregnancy didn't happen immediately, they started trying, and it forced Eva to see her body in a new way, and she didn't like it. Quote, "I felt expendable, thrown away, swallowed by a big biological project that I didn't initiate or choose, that produced me but would also chew me up and spit me out. I felt used." End quote. When Eva did conceive at 37, her reaction wasn't excitement but shock. Her feelings about having a child shifted constantly. In some letters, she insists she never really wanted Kevin. Quote, "It's not true that I was ambivalent about motherhood. You wanted to have a child. On balance, I did not. Added together, that seemed like ambivalence. But though we were a superlative couple, we were not the same person." End quote. But she also wonders if regret from later years distorts her memories. Quote, I'm no longer sure whether I wrote our first child before he was even born. It's hard for me to reconstruct that period without contaminating the memories with the outsized regret of later years. End quote. As soon as Eva found out she was pregnant, she started developing resentments towards the whole process. Some of them were petty, as she admits, like not being able to drink. Physically, the pregnancy was fine, easier than expected, but mentally, Eva felt victimized, treated like some fragile princess by Franklin. She was also convinced people saw her differently, not only with fascination but revulsion. This perception very likely stemmed from her own discomfort in her body. Meanwhile, Franklin was ecstatic. He threw himself into fatherhood right away, which of course made Eva more frustrated and even jealous. Quote, you were just desperate to throw yourself into this parenting business, weren't you? Was our life together that unbearable to you, that bleak? End quote. Eva tried seeking reassurance, perhaps even a way out of the whole situation. She wanted to test the baby for Down syndrome. Franklin was against it, so she did it behind his back. Quote, my approach to parenthood was conditional, and the conditions were strict. I did not want to mother an imbecile or a paraplegic. End quote. To make the baby feel more like hers, Eva wanted it to have her last name, which of course led to a small argument with Franklin. In the end, they made a weird deal. If it was a girl, she'd get Franklin's surname, but if it was a boy, he'd get Eva's. It's an interesting detail considering how much Kevin ends up reflecting Eva in ways she never wanted. They share more than just a name. It's almost as if, from the start, he was marked as hers. When Eva learned they were having a boy, her heart sank. She had always imagined having a girl, and she had always been uneasy about boys. She recalls an incident from childhood when a group of them attacked her. Quote, any woman who passes a clump of testosterone-drunk punks without picking up the pace, without avoiding the eye contact that might connote challenge or invitation, without sighing inwardly with relief by the following block, is a zoological fool. A boy is a dangerous animal. End quote. Once again, it's unclear if this fear of boys really came from Eva's past or if it was shaped by Kevin's later actions. Eva's birth experience was symbolic of her emotional detachment and resistance to motherhood. Kevin was 2 weeks late, which she interpreted as him hiding not only from the world but from her. The labor itself was traumatic, as Eva, driven by pride, refused pain management, almost as if she needed to punish herself for not feeling more excited about becoming a mother. Quote, I seized on this refusal, as if passing this little test were the point and not passing an infant son. So long as I declined the needle, I was winning. End quote. When the pain became unbearable, Eva finally asked for an epidural, but it was too late. Throughout the entire process, Eva wasn't just mentally resisting, her body was fighting it too. As she describes, quote, whenever the enormous mass approached that tiny canal, I'd been sucking it back. Because it hurt a whole lot. I was overcome with contempt. The emotion on which I fastened in order to push beyond a critical threshold was loathing. End quote. It was only when the doctor threatened a C-section that Eva finally forced herself to push. Eva's portrayal of the 37-hour labor might seem intense and bleak, but what she felt wasn't that unusual. Many mothers have similar feelings, for example, pushing with feelings of anger or resentment toward the child in the moment, but these are just temporary feelings, not an indication that you will hate your child forever. What happened after the birth is what truly threw Eva off. Eva had expected a flood of love and joy, but instead felt empty. When Kevin didn't latch on, it just made Eva feel even more disconnected, like she was being rejected. Watching Franklin bond with Kevin only made things worse. Quote, I made a vow that while I might have learned to expose my private parts for all the world to see, I would never reveal to anyone on earth that childbirth had left me unmoved. End quote. At home, things only seemed to get worse. Kevin refused to drink Eva's milk, and she even felt like he was gagging at times. Kevin wouldn't even take a bottle from her, but seemed perfectly fine when Franklin offered it. Eventually, Eva developed a painful breast inflammation, which only intensified her growing sense that Kevin either hated her or sensed that her attempts to bond with him were forced and insincere. It didn't make things any easier that Kevin would scream with rage, as Eva points out, non-stop when he was with her, but not when he was with Franklin. As Lionel Shriver points out, Eva's main issue is that she takes everything personally, often attributing too much intent and agency to an infant. Quote, it's almost a form of anthropomorphism. That is, you are imbuing a half-formed being, a child, with fully formed adult traits. In some ways, she related to him from the very beginning as a peer, and that's a mistake. And therefore, everything he does, she takes personally, and doesn't bring to motherhood sympathy for the state of childhood and the kind of forgiveness that involves. End quote. For example, Franklin read in a book that it was important to smile at infants to encourage them to smile back. So Eva started smiling and smiling until her face hurt. At this point, Kevin is around 7 weeks old. According to child development research, infants typically begin social smiling between 6 and 12 weeks. Kevin is not abnormal. There is still time for him to develop the responses. However, for Eva, looking back, this moment feels sinister. Her expectations about motherhood and Kevin's behavior were too rigid. Studies do show that infants can sense the emotions of their caregivers. But that doesn't mean that Kevin hated Eva. He was simply reacting to what she was giving off. Early emotional bonding is key to a child's development, and when a mother is emotionally distant, it can affect how the child forms attachment, regulates emotions, and interacts with others. You see all of these problems in Kevin as he grows up. From the very beginning, Eva treated him more like an opponent than a helpless baby, overanalyzing his every emotion and action. She let her resentment and detachment shape how she interacted with him. Eva isn't a bad person. She doesn't know how to interact with a child because her mother never treated her as one. She never experienced the nurturing, playful, and forgiving parenting. She was a little adult almost from the very beginning, and she expected Kevin to be one as well. You feel a lot of sympathy for Eva, but she made certain choices that only deepened the gap between her and Kevin. Eva needed help, but she had trouble opening up to professionals or even Franklin. Eva was diagnosed with postnatal depression, but she quickly dismissed the label as shallow. She believes that slapping a label on personal struggles doesn't offer any real help, and she critiques the American habit of categorizing everything. Eva also didn't want to be grouped with other mothers because she felt her problems were much deeper than that. Quote, "The term was less diagnostic than tautological. I was depressed after Kevin's birth because I was depressed after Kevin's birth. Thanks." End quote. You can't know exactly how involved Franklin was during this time, but since he was working, Eva was the one home with Kevin most of the time. She romanticized Franklin's role, making it seem like Kevin had a special bond with him, when in reality, Franklin was just not stressed. Eva carried the weight of expectations and pressure that often fall on mothers, while Franklin had the luxury of being the fun parent. In the end, though, instead of getting to the bottom of Eva's problem, Franklin suggested hiring a nanny. Eva and Franklin's experience with nannies make it easy to assume that something was deeply wrong with Kevin. One nanny quit after just a single day, which seems ominous, but there could have been plenty of reasons for it. She might have been young, overwhelmed, or just not prepared to handle a fuzzy toddler. Childcare jobs often have high turnover. One nanny, Siobhan, stuck around longer but eventually admitted Kevin unsettled her. However, it was only after Eva prodded her looking for validation of her own feelings. Siobhan mentioned that Kevin would aggressively pull her hair and throw his toys or food on the floor, demanding she pick them up just so he could throw them again. This does make Kevin seem difficult, and he was, but toddlers can be frustrating in general. None of this necessarily proves he was born a monster. When Siobhan was quitting, she casually pointed out that at a year and a half, Kevin should have been saying at least a few words, and maybe Eva should talk to him more or consult a doctor.
Can you say ball? Ball? Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba.
Depending on your perspective, this either looks like another red flag about Kevin or a reflection of Eva's emotional detachment. Eva's growing frustration eventually boiled over into one of the most infamous moments in the movie, the "mommy wishes she was in France" scene. In the book, it's even worse. Eva calls Kevin a little shit and says she'd rather die than hear him scream again. Franklin hears all of this. What sticks with Eva, though, is Kevin's reaction. His eyes were dark and he was crying with his eyes open. She thought there was something unnatural about it, though in reality, babies sometimes do cry that way. After the nanny left, Kevin suddenly stopped his hysterical screaming. But instead of relief, Eva found his silence just as unsettling. Quote, "Before becoming a mother, I pictured having a small child at my side like owning a bright, friendly dog. But Kevin felt so much heavier, like a constant presence I couldn't ignore. Even though his new quietness made it easier to work from home, I still felt watched, and it made me uneasy." End quote. Eventually, Eva decided to take Kevin to a doctor, hoping something was medically wrong with him. Because if Kevin had been deaf or autistic, at least she could have felt some sympathy for him. But the doctor found nothing. Kevin was perfectly healthy, just a bit floppy and underweight. Eva briefly mentions in her letters that Kevin had strange eating habits when he was a toddler. He would only eat if she wasn't watching. His refusal to play or eat in front of her wasn't just him being difficult. It could have been a natural response to emotional neglect. When Kevin finally started talking, Eva realized she was uncomfortable with any word that referred to the word mother. That's how Mama was born, Kevin's own version of the word.
Mama's fat.
Later, in his teen years, he'd switched to Mumsy.
What next, Mumsy?
Eva only referred to herself as a mother in the third person, which highlighted her emotional detachment from the role.
You have your room. This is Mama's room.
Kevin's toddler years were a constant power struggle with Eva, but what's really interesting is how much of it came down to her perception of him. Kevin was smart, stubborn, and provocative, but Eva's own issues made her see him as more of a calculated, manipulative mastermind than just a typical toddler testing limits. Tilda Swinton, who played Eva, acknowledged the depth of their toxic dynamic, saying, quote, "This is maybe a contentious thing to say, and maybe I will regret it later, but there is as much violence between the mother and the son as what goes on in that high school gym." End quote. When Kevin was 3, Eva slapped him for the first time while they were at a cafe. At this stage, he was fully in the testing boundaries phase and he enjoyed saying no. Something Eva saw as part of Kevin's personality rather than just a typical phase of a child's normal development. During a meal, Kevin started acting out, playing with his food, interrupting Eva and Franklin's conversation, and in the most humiliating moment for Eva, pointing at a waitress's birthmark and calling it poop. Quote, "I slapped him. It wasn't very hard. He looked happy." End quote. Kevin started crying, but Eva felt it was too performative. Quote, "His tears were a bit late, in my view. I wasn't moved. I left him to it." End quote. Eva's inability to see Kevin as just a kid also shows itself in the way she handles his delayed toilet training. Kevin was still in diapers at 6 years old, and Eva had to change him at kindergarten, where the other kids started copying his behavior as well at some point. To her, it wasn't just frustrating, it felt like a power play.
You enjoying yourself?
Eventually, Eva snapped once again, throwing Kevin and breaking his arm. In that moment, she admits she felt good. Quote, "For 2 seconds, I'd felt whole. And like Kevin's real mother, I felt close to him. I felt like myself, my true, unexpurgated self. And I felt we were finally communicating." End quote. Kevin's reaction was just as strange in Eva's eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't tell the doctor or Franklin what really happened. Later, while in detention, Kevin would tell Eva,
Most honest thing you ever did.
Eva did say sorry almost immediately, but her later apology on the way home from the hospital was in third person.
What Mama did was very, very wrong. And she's so sorry.
Kevin's behavior afterward confused Eva, but it made perfect sense for a child who had been physically hurt by a mother who is emotionally unpredictable. Kevin started using the toilet properly, refused to let Eva bathe him, dressed in private, and stopped accepting any affection from her. Imagine your mom breaking your arm and then expecting a kiss in return. Kevin wearing diapers for so long likely wasn't from pure malice. He might not have felt secure or supported enough to develop normally. Without the nurturing he needed, he might have stayed in diapers as a way to assert control or challenge Eva's authority. Maybe he simply wanted to get his mom's attention. Lionel Shriver actually drew inspiration from her own life when creating this story.
I have a nephew who was in nappies until he was 6, which is where I got the idea that that was credible. And, he wasn't some kind of psychopath weirdo that had to be sent for therapy.
A big turning point in Eva's life came when Franklin decided it was time to leave New York and move to the suburbs. Eva reluctantly agreed to the move, but only on the condition that she got to go on a work trip to Africa. Looking back, she admits it was a bad deal because she didn't enjoy the trip and ended up cutting it short. While she was away, Franklin bought a house in the suburbs, which Eva hated from the start. She was sure Kevin didn't like it either, and she felt some weird sense of connection with him over that. Eva struggled to like anything that she hadn't personally chosen or planned. The furniture she had didn't match the new house, making her feel like she was losing her identity. That's why her study, the only room in the house she felt was hers, became so important. She worked for months on it, plastering her favorite maps on the walls, but then in one moment, Kevin destroyed it with a squirt gun filled with paint. Eva thought Kevin had done it on purpose. When he dismissed the maps as dumb and asked why she even bothered, she took it personally, seeing it as an attack on who she was.
They're dumb.
She was an adult, but in that moment, she was desperately hoping for validation from a child. Quote, "I was proud of my life, and while I told myself that through an accomplished mother, Kevin might find pride in himself, I probably just wanted him to be proud of me." End quote. Eva's reaction to Kevin destroying her study project was explosive and childish. She didn't discipline him, she destroyed his toy instead. Quote, "I snatched the gun, flung it on the floor, and stamped it to bits. I was wearing pretty yellow Italian pumps. The ink ruined my shoes." End quote. The detail about her yellow shoes in the letter adds a darkly absurd touch, highlighting Eva's self-centered character. Eva never took the maps down. She kept them on the wall as a reminder of what Kevin had done to her, just like the scar he carried from the broken arm. Quote, "I needed to see something you'd done to me, to reach out and touch it, to prove that your malice wasn't all in my head." "Yeah," he said, tickling the scar on his arm again. know what you mean," end quote. There were a couple of incidents at Kevin's kindergarten that unsettled Eva. Kevin did struggle to connect with other kids, and his teacher described him as under-socialized. First, a classmate brought a fancy china tea set for show and tell. She poured tea for everyone. Kevin lifted his cup, then dropped it. One by one, the other kids copied him, smashing the whole set. Eva saw it as a calculated act of sabotage. Another weird incident involved a girl with eczema. Eva and the teacher found them in the bathroom, but they weren't sure what had happened. The girl was covered in blood. Shriver commented on the eczema incident, explaining, quote, "When you start thinking about it more objectively, he didn't do much. He goes to kindergarten where one of his classmates has an eczema condition, and they're discovered in the bathroom together, and she's scratching her skin open and he's whispering in her ear. The implication is that he has enticed her into scraping her arms and legs open against the warnings of her mother. But there's no real evidence for that. And what does that mean? The kid is only 6 years old. Mostly he doesn't stop the classmate from scratching her arms. In other words, it's small, but for the mother it's enormous. But her vision is impaired. She's wearing spectacles that magnify everything." End quote. When Kevin was around 8, Eva decided to have a second child, partly out of curiosity, to see if her experience of motherhood would be different this time. Eva writes that Franklin was against it, blaming Eva for Kevin's issues. Quote, "I do what I can to make up for your coldness, but there is no substitute for a mother's love, and I'm damned if I let you freeze out another kid of mine." End quote. Eva got pregnant without Franklin knowing, and he didn't find out until she was 3 months into her pregnancy.
When were you going to tell me?
Soon. Now.
Eva was 45, and this time, Franklin wanted her to test the baby for Down syndrome, but Eva chose not to. Quote, "I said that I didn't think I was romantic about the rewards of raising a disabled child, but I was probably too strict about what and whom I chose to love, so I wanted to trust." End quote. Every part of this pregnancy was the opposite of Eva's experience with Kevin. This time, Franklin wasn't hovering over her, so she did as she pleased, exercising and even drinking wine. She had a strong feeling she was having a girl, and she was right. Celia arrived 2 weeks early, which Eva took as a sign that she was eager to be with her. The birth was easy and smooth because Eva opted for anesthesia and lowered her expectations of how she should feel. Quote, "A baby is a baby, each miraculous in its way, but to demand transformation on the instant of delivery was to place too great a burden on a small, confused bundle and an exhausted middle-aged mother, both." End quote. From the very start, Eva sensed that Celia was very different from Kevin. Quote, "Still, on the birth of both my children, I could immediately discern a dominant emotional tone. In Kevin, the note was the shrill high pitch of a whistle. The color was a pulsing aerotal red, and the feeling was fury. Yet when Celia slid to hand, she might have been visually beat-faced and bloody, but her oral color was light blue." End quote. Kevin was a difficult child by nature, and any first-time parent would have struggled with him. But I don't think having Celia first would have magically solved Eva's deeper issues with control and resentment. Maybe she would have felt more at ease, but the real reason Celia felt easier was because Eva had Kevin to compare her to. Eva's struggles weren't just about Kevin. They were about what motherhood took from her. It wasn't about having a son versus a daughter. It was about the fact that being a mother required a level of selflessness she wasn't ready to give. Eva naturally focused all her attention on Celia, thus pushing Kevin further away, relying on Franklin to spend time with him. Quote, "I'm ashamed of this, I really am, but while I can remember how I spent every one of Celia's birthdays during those years, my memories of Kevin from the age of 8 to about 14 tend to blur." End quote. You can't exactly call Celia a psychologically healthy child. While Kevin and Celia were polar opposites, they were both extreme in their own ways. Celia rarely cried, whereas Kevin had screamed constantly as a baby. Kevin showed little interest in toys and got bored easily, while Celia loved everything so much that she struggled to choose. She was easily impressed, sometimes by the silliest things. Unlike Kevin, who seemed fearless, Celia was scared of many things. She was sensitive to certain textures and foods. She had bathroom issues, not in the same way as Kevin, but in that she was too afraid to go by herself, to the point that Eva or Franklin had to wake up in the middle of the night to help her. Academically, Celia also wasn't as bright as Kevin. Celia was overly sensitive, eager to please, and couldn't handle criticism. She never stood up for herself. While Kevin openly rejected authority, Celia was consumed by the fear of disappointing others. Franklin thought Eva was coddling Celia too much. Since the entire story is told through Eva's perspective, it often feels like the other characters are just extensions of her mind. She's at war with different parts of herself. Kevin is is her resentment, her sense of superiority. He's everything dark and unflattering about her. Celia is her guilt and fears. She exists to make up for everything Eva thinks she did wrong with Kevin. And Franklin is Eva's self-doubt, this overly optimistic voice telling her she's wrong about everything. I've talked a lot about Eva's perception of Kevin, but I don't want it to sound like everything was her fault or that there was nothing off about Kevin to begin with. There's no clear-cut answer. However, one thing is certain, Lionel Shriver never intended for Kevin to be portrayed as a psychopath.
I did not ever intend to portray this kid as a psychopath. I don't think this kid is incapable of emotion. I think he's incredibly good at disguising them. But I meant to indicate that underneath all this, there is a person somewhere.
She also doesn't like the idea of labeling people as intrinsically evil.
I've always been uncomfortable with readers who just want to write Kevin off as evil, and I think that the word is dangerous. It is actually a dehumanizing word. It's a way of putting a label on other folks so that we don't have to bother to understand them.
From early on, teachers noted Kevin's unusual behavior. In kindergarten, he was under-socialized, and later the teachers diagnosed him with attention deficit disorder, a fashionable label which Eva didn't agree with. Later, in juvenile detention, a therapist diagnosed Kevin with empathic deficiency. But again, Eva wasn't convinced. She believed Kevin wasn't lacking empathy, he just chose to control his emotions. His actions were calculated. Kevin's personality is probably a mix of natural temperament and the environment he grew up in. His introversion, rebellious nature, sharp intellect, and even some of his lack of empathy could just be part of who he is. But being raised by parents like Eva and Franklin only intensified those traits. His lack of empathy doesn't feel like just an inborn flaw. It's an extension of Eva's emotional detachment. On one side, Kevin has a mother who, whether she means it or not, makes it clear with every action that she doesn't like him. She doesn't try to understand him because she's already decided who he is.
Just because you're used to something doesn't mean you like it. You're used to me.
On the other side, he has a father blinded by his need to see Kevin as a happy all-American child to the point of ignoring anything that doesn't fit that picture. Franklin isn't really seeing Kevin, he's seeing the version of him that makes him feel like a good father. Kevin, aware of his parents' hypocrisy, plays into their delusions. Kevin realized from a young age that being attached to things made him vulnerable. Lionel Shriver explains that the squirt gun incident was a big lesson for Kevin. At 4.5 years old, it was the first toy he really liked, and Eva thought he enjoyed it mainly because he could annoy people with it. During the family's move, Kevin was spraying the movers, ignoring Eva's repeated warnings. Instead of helping, Franklin joined in, squirting Eva too. Frustrated, Eva took the toy and hid it in her purse, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. That's when Kevin realized that caring about something gave other people power over him. Kevin didn't cry but was clearly angry. He even demanded the gun back. Eva didn't give in and put the squirt gun out of reach on top of the kitchen cupboards, but Kevin climbed up and retrieved it. Despite Eva's attempts to discipline him, Franklin again failed to support her. Kevin's frustration finally exploded when he destroyed Eva's study. Whether it was a calculated act of revenge or a simple cry for attention is hard to say. Either way, it wasn't about the squirt gun anymore. It was about control and pushing back against the authority that Eva was trying to establish. While in detention, Kevin admits that he always knew Eva never really wanted him. Quote, "You never wanted to have me, did you? I thought I did," I said. "And your father, he wanted you desperately." "You thought you did," he said. "You changed your mind." "I thought I needed a change," I said. "But no one needs a change for the worse." "But I went out of my way," he said with a smile that lifted lifelessly as if by hooks, "to keep you entertained. I couldn't have expected that simply forming an attachment to you would be so much work. I thought that part came for free." "Free? Waking up every morning isn't free." "Ever occur to you," he said slyly, "maybe I didn't want to have you?" End quote. By the time Kevin turned 14, his detached, nihilistic attitude grew even stronger, something Shriver attributes to the moodiness of adolescence.
I do think that what Eva senses missing in him is fairly widespread. And in fact, I'm very sympathetic with Kevin. There's nothing about the adult world that seems to offer him anything. It bores him, it seems pointless, and I can see how young people would feel that way.
Kevin spent most of his time hiding behind a mask of boredom and indifference, but it slipped twice, once when he got sick at 10 years old and again on Thursday. When Kevin was sick, he couldn't keep up the act anymore. He became needy, and for the first time, he showed affection for things. He had a favorite pair of pajamas, he didn't want to spend time with Franklin, he wanted Eva to take care of him, and he was even nice to his sister.
"I'm sorry, Mom."
Quote, "Call it rage or resentment, it was only a matter of degree. But underneath the levels of fury, I was astonished to discover lay a carpet of despair. He wasn't mad, he was sad." End quote. During this time, Kevin became attached to the book Eva started reading to him, Robin Hood and His Merry Men. He kept the book into his teen years, and in his nightmarishly tidy bedroom with boring beige sheets, as Eva puts it, it was the only thing on his shelf. It makes sense. Robin Hood is a rebel, someone who challenges authority. Kevin liked the story so much that Eva and Franklin even bought him a bow and arrows, which would later become his murder weapon. But it's very unlikely he had that planned from the start. I think he kept the book as a reminder of that brief moment when he and Eva were playing their roles as mother and son, when everything was how it was supposed to be. Despite his efforts to suppress his emotions, Kevin envied those with real passions. This envy led him to choose his victims at school. Eva reflects on this in one of her letters, quote, "This veracity of his may go some distance toward explaining his cruelty, which among other things must be an inept attempt at taking part. Having never seen the point of anything, he must feel so brutally left out," end quote. But as Lionel Shriver explained, the main people Kevin had a problem with were not the school kids, but his family members, Franklin and his sister Celia, who from the start was treated with more warmth and affection than he ever was. Eva kept a close watch on how Kevin treated Celia. He would break her toys, tie her up, force her to eat foods she hated, and play pranks on her. Franklin, of course, saw it as nothing more than typical sibling rivalry. Lionel Shriver also sees such behavior as typical, rather than anything truly sinister.
I'd actually take exception to that. First off, I had two brothers, and I can tell you what siblings do to each other. Those stories are nothing.
So at some point, something had to shift for Kevin, some turning point that pushed him from resentment to murder, and Eva thinks she knows when that was. Shriver wants readers to understand that just because Kevin did something horrible in the end doesn't automatically mean he was guilty of everything he was ever accused of.
The fact that Kevin performs this atrocity seems to demonstrate that she's right, that there was something wrong with him to begin with. But there's a logical fallacy in this because it still doesn't cover her for having made him that way.
For example, in his teen years, there was an incident with Kevin and his friend Lenny, who is more of a pet hamster to him than an actual friend. The two got caught by police officers who saw them throwing bricks at cars from an overpass. When confronted, Kevin told Franklin that they had started with water balloons, but Lenny escalated things, and Kevin had actually tried to stop him. Eva didn't believe Kevin, but later she overheard a conversation between him and Lenny that proved he was telling the truth. Shriver included this scene specifically to make readers question Eva's version of events. Eva felt so guilty that she invited Kevin on a mother-son outing, something you see in the movie too. Quote, "To say that I wanted, truly desired, to spend all afternoon and evening with my prickly 14-year-old son would be a stretch. But I did powerfully desire to desire it, if that makes any sense." End quote. They played miniature golf, Kevin won and Eva was bored. This whole outing is key to understanding Eva's personality and, in turn, where Kevin gets some of his traits.
Yeah, you can be kind of harsh sometimes.
You're one to talk.
Wonder where I got it.
One of the first things she does is make judgmental comments about overweight people, which the movie keeps in, but it feels off.
Whenever I see fat people, they're always eating.
In the film, Eva comes across as way more passive and depressed, so her snarky side feels random. Plus, the most important parts of her conversations with Kevin, the ones that really help you understand their dynamic, are left out. After golf, they went to dinner, where Eva ordered a full bottle of wine, tried and failed to play the role of a good mother, and eventually spiraled into a full-on rant when Kevin asked why she hated America so much. Quote, "Look, one of the things about this country I really can't stand is the lack of accountability. Americans are fat, inarticulate, and ignorant. They're demanding, imperious, and spoiled. They're self-righteous and superior about their precious democracy and condescending toward other nationalities. And they're boastful too." End quote. Kevin immediately called her out, saying that she was no different. It's fascinating how Kevin and Eva share so many of the same qualities. The same sharpness, the same cynicism, the same distaste for anything ordinary. The same need to feel special and superior, and yet it's exactly those traits that make them butt heads. It's mentioned that they even look alike, both kind of androgynous, which adds to the whole mirror dynamic between them. It bothered Eva though. She always wished Kevin had looked more like Franklin. Kevin's need to feel different and superior showed on everything he did. At 14, he started wearing ridiculously small clothes. Quote, "There was more than a suggestion of Peter Pan about the style, a refusal to grow up. He looks uncomfortable. The tiny clothing replicates the same constriction that he feels in his own skin. Discomfort begets discomfort in others, of course, and that too must be part of the plan." End quote. The same logic applies to Kevin's weapon of choice. He didn't bring a gun to school like every other mass shooter. He brought a bow and arrows. In a way, it was his way of proving he was different, but it was also a direct challenge to Eva. She had always believed that stricter gun control could solve the problem of school shootings. So Kevin set out to prove her wrong. One thing the movie leaves out is the setting. In the book, Kevin commits his crime just 12 days before Columbine. Lionel Shriver sets the story in the late 90s on purpose, right when America was just starting to face the reality of school shootings. There were 3 major controversial incidents leading up to Kevin's final act, and his involvement in each was never fully proven. The first incident occurred when Eva decided to buy a 7-year-old Celia a special Christmas gift. In the movie, she gives her a guinea pig, but in the original story, she buys an expensive and exotic animal, an elephant shrew. This detail is significant because it sheds light on Eva's character, her tendency towards indulgence and extravagance and uniqueness once again. Eva mentions that Celia took good care of her animal until it mysteriously disappeared from its cage. Around the same time, the kids' bathroom sink backed up and had a weird smell, so Eva used a drain cleaner to fix it. It was never revealed what was in that sink. The timing of everything is definitely suspicious. Even if Celia wasn't careful and the animal got out, why would it end up in the sink? There's a big possibility that Kevin could be involved, but if he was, wouldn't he want to see Eva's reaction? Maybe that's exactly why the second incident also involved the same drain cleaner. Eva swore she had put the drain cleaner away, but somehow Celia still ended up with it in her eye, and tragically she had to have it surgically removed. Kevin told Franklin that when he heard Celia screaming, he rushed over, rinsed her eye with water, and called an ambulance before calling Franklin. Both parents were at work. But Eva couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. Despite her suspicions, she never pressed Celia for more details. She only asked her once what happened, and Celia's response was vague. Quote, "Kevin, I got something in my eye. Kevin helped me wash it out." End quote. The fact that Celia doesn't specify what got into her eye is very suspicious. Maybe Celia really did get something in her eye and asked Kevin for help. And maybe Kevin tricked her. And when they got to the bathroom, Kevin secretly used the cleaner. So to Celia, nothing seems strange. Kevin is helping her. Given how anxious and scared Celia usually is of almost everything, especially about being alone in the bathroom, it's hard to believe she could have done this to herself. But after this incident, Eva no longer tried to hide the fact that Celia was her favorite child. She began to ignore Kevin without guilt, and that is when Kevin had a scandal at his school. His drama teacher was accused of inappropriate behavior. The school held a closed hearing, to which only the parents of 4 students were invited, among them Kevin and his friend Lenny. In his testimony, Kevin claimed that the teacher touched him through his jeans, which caused him to ejaculate. However, Lenny's testimony was so poorly delivered and inconsistent that it became obvious to everyone that he was lying. This immediately cast doubt on the truth of the claims. Eva, as usual, became convinced that Kevin was lying as well, especially given how rehearsed his testimony sounded to her, which contrasted with his overall sexual nature at home. As Eva writes, Kevin would pleasure himself in his bedroom but with the door wide open to purposefully get her attention. On one hand, you can say that Kevin gets a kick out of ruining people's lives, especially those who have real passion and purpose like his drama teacher. But then again, what if the assault actually happened? What if he felt so out of control and angry that he wanted revenge and chose to humiliate the drama teacher on a larger scale by spreading the information around? In a documentary about him, when Kevin is asked about the case, he doesn't outright deny it, but then again, he could just be lying. Quote, "What about that sexual abuse case? Might that have left you feeling bruised? Sure, I was interfered with, but hell, that was nothing compared to what happens here." End quote. The school ultimately didn't fire the drama teacher as there was no concrete evidence. Instead, they reassigned her to administrative duties. That same day, when the family got home, Eva and Franklin had a huge fight. Eva suggested sending Kevin to a boarding school or a military academy, but Franklin dismissed the idea, eventually expressing his desire for a divorce.
At least custody is a no-brainer.
Despite Eva's letters revealing that after the incident with Celia, she was scared of Kevin, it never occurred to her to leave. Quote, "I hated the prospect of defeat, but theoretically, our son was out of the house in about 3 years. Thereafter, it would just be you, me, and Celia, and then we would see about that happy family of yours." End quote. Kevin overheard the whole conversation between Eva and Franklin, and Eva believes that's when he decided on his big plan. Quote, "In retrospect, I can only assume that it was bad enough living with a woman who was cold, suspicious, resentful, accusatory, and aloof. Only one eventuality must have seemed worse, and that was living with you, Franklin, getting stuck with Dad." End quote. Kevin began preparing for his plan. First, he told Franklin that he was depressed and wanted to get on Prozac. Later, he would use this as his defense, claiming to be part of the tiny percentage of Prozac users who had a severe negative reaction to the drug. Then, he started ordering arrows and padlocks, telling Eva that he planned to sell them at school. Eva didn't find these purchases alarming, even though she blamed Kevin for many things. When she received a call at work that fateful Thursday about her son's school, she never once suspected he was the one behind it. Kevin's motives seem layered at first. On the surface, there is a nihilistic ideology that drives him. His violence is a rejection of the idea that the world has any meaning. And yet, ironically, he's also trying to leave his own mark on it. Destruction for Kevin becomes the only way to prove he exists. It's his way of getting the world to notice him. This idea also connects with the conversation he and Eva once had about the computer viruses he was creating. After Eva stole one of his disks and infected not only her personal computer, but every machine at her workplace. Eva didn't understand the appeal of something so destructive and pointless, which in Kevin's mind was exactly the point. Quote, viruses, they're kind of elegant, you know? Almost pure. Kind of like charity work, you know? It's selfless. So it's this almost to what? Know you're alive? To show other people they don't control you? To prove you can do something, even if it could get you arrested? Yeah, pretty much, he said appreciatively. End quote. That same perspective was echoed by one of Kevin's teachers, who later became one of his victims. Before her death, she told Eva that Kevin always looked like he was raging inside. Quote, maybe he's mad that this is as good as it gets. Your big house, his good school. I think it's very difficult for kids these days, in a way. The country's very prosperity has become a burden, a dead end. Everything works, doesn't it? At least if you're white and middle class. So it must often seem to young people that they're not needed. In a sense, it's as if there's nothing more to do. Except tear it apart, Eva replied. End quote. But that whole ideology, the need to make Thursday mean nothing, wasn't really the point. It was a front, a way to seem untouchable, above it all. Deep down, it wasn't all that different from any other story. Kevin didn't want to give Eva all the credit, but in the end, it was all about her. Kevin didn't kill Eva because all of this performance was for her. Quote, when you are putting on a show, you don't shoot the audience. End quote. Kevin didn't want to share Eva, not with Franklin, not with Celia, not with her job. So he kept pushing, testing her until there was nothing left but the two of them. His violence was a way of forcing her to finally acknowledge him. It wasn't just punishment. It was the final test to see if she cared, or if she'd finally walk away. Because Kevin did care. He would go to bookstores just to see his mother's work. And when Celia was born, he stole a photo of Eva in her 20s. One she thought he had destroyed. But he'd kept it all along, taping it above his bed in the detention center. Somewhere between being an innocent baby and firing arrows at his peers, Kevin became the person Eva had always imagined him to be. And in turn, in some twisted way, Eva was forced to become the mother Kevin always needed. After the massacre, Eva lost everything. She was sued by the parents of Kevin's victims, but eventually found not guilty. It didn't matter. She stayed in the same town, not because she had to, but to punish herself. Quote, this is the only place in the world where the ramifications of my life are fully felt, and it's far less important to me to be liked these days than to be understood. End quote. Eva wanted to attend the funerals of all Kevin's victims. Only one mother allowed her. She also donated to a scholarship fund of one of Kevin's victims. Eva visited Kevin every 2 weeks, not for him, but for herself, and she dreaded it every time. Quote, there may indeed be an element of theater in these visits, but they continue when no one is watching. Because if I'm trying to prove that I'm a good mother, I'm proving this, dismally as it happens, to myself. End quote. At first, the visits were cold. Kevin was angry because he didn't believe Eva was authentic. For a while, they just played their roles, the sociopath and the loyal mother. But over time, their real selves began to show. During one visit, Eva noticed Kevin fidgeting with something in his hand. It was Celia's glass eye. He had kept it all that time. Disgusted, Eva warned him that if he ever brought it again, she wouldn't come back. He never did, because Kevin still wanted her to keep coming. Right before turning 18, the day Kevin was being transferred to adult prison, Eva finally asked him why, but Kevin had no answer.
I used to think I knew. Now I'm not so sure.
Lionel Shriver explained,
it's only as he's turned 18 and is looking at manhood and manhood in an adult prison that he becomes a boy. For Kevin, getting smart is realizing that he'd been an idiot.
As a peace offering, Kevin gave Eva a small wooden coffin. Inside, it was implied, was Celia's glass eye. He told her not to open it, just to bury it. When they hugged goodbye, Eva thought Kevin said I'm sorry, so she said it back. In her last letter, Eva writes that she's waiting for Kevin to be released. He has 5 more years to go. She has already prepared a room for him, clean sheets, a copy of Robin Hood. She's too tired to fight anymore. Quote, I can finally announce that I'm too exhausted and too confused and too lonely to keep fighting. And if only out of desperation or even laziness, I love my son." End quote. In the end, Eva finally becomes the mother, not because she was destined to or wanted to, but because it's all she has left. Lionel Shriver wanted the ending to hold a little hope that maybe some things can still be repaired.
It is possible that they will have a relationship which is not unremittingly hostile in future. And that it isn't that big, soppy redemption, but there is a little glimmer of hope, I think, without which this book would be unendurable.
So is Eva at fault? Shriver thinks that at least partly, yes. Of course, she's not responsible for Kevin's actions, especially in the end. But in Shriver's words, Kevin may have been a difficult child, but she didn't improve matters. She did help to make him. Shriver never intended to give a clean answer to the nature versus nurture question, because there isn't one. But she did want Eva to take some responsibility. This is a story about accountability, not just Kevin's, but Eva's too. To be a parent is to face the worst part of yourself in the form of your child. It's only when Eva is stripped of everything that she can finally see her true self. By accepting Kevin, she finally accepts herself.